A black woman in a sharp gray suit is driving her Tesla down the road after a long and exhausting day at work. A white police officer suddenly pulls her over for no apparent reason, his eyes filled with contempt. The initial exchange quickly turns into a tense confrontation filled with power games and his prejudice against people of color. He repeatedly makes unreasonable accusations and demands obedience from the black woman. What he doesn't realize is that she is not an ordinary civilian. She is the chief of internal affairs. And tonight, he's about to answer for every act of unchecked abuse of power he's committed. Where in the world are you watching this story from? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below and be sure to subscribe so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. The city of Hawthorne bathed in the soft golden glow of twilight, its skyline etched against the sky like a silhouette dipped in amber. The streets pulsed with the familiar rhythm of evening life commuters inching their way home, the distant rumble of trains echoing beneath the freeway headlights blinking like fireflies in organized chaos. Storefronts reflected the hues of the setting sun, casting long shadows on the pavement, while the scent of grilled street food drifted faintly through the air. In the midst of this serene yet bustling scene, a sleek obsidian black Tesla glided smoothly down Monroe Avenue. Behind the wheel sat Imani Carter, a woman whose presence alone exuded poise and quiet authority. She was in her late 30s with smooth, deep brown skin and tightly coiled natural hair pinned in a clean updo that framed her sharp cheekbones and determined eyes. Her tailored navy suit fit her like it had been sewn by intent, not just for form, but for purpose. A leather-bound folder and a silver laptop case sat beside her on the passenger seat, remnants of a long and taxing day, filled with internal briefings, policy revisions, and one particularly contentious meeting with the Civilian Oversight Committee. The jazz murmuring from her stereo, a mellow Coltrane solo offered a brief balm to her buzzing thoughts. Imani reached toward the central console to adjust the volume her fingers adorned with elegant, understated rings that matched the minimalist silver watch around her wrist. Her eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror just as the traffic light ahead turned from green to amber. She slowed her foot, easing gently onto the brake pedal, allowing the car to come to a smooth, complete stop at the red. Her breathing settled for a moment as she stared at the fading sun, mentally rewinding the day's many tensions. But just as she reached for her bottle of water, a sudden flare of red and blue light reflected in the mirror, jarring and unwelcome, followed by the piercing screech of a siren. It cut through the music and the calm like a blade. Her brow furrowed slightly. No sharp turns, no speeding, no missed signals. The kind of confusion that came from innocence prickled at the edge of her calm. Still, she took a steady breath, trained by years of experience never to show the storm that sometimes brewed behind her eyes. Imani flicked on her turn signal, slowly pulled her vehicle to the side of the road, and parked with deliberate precision, hands resting openly on the wheel. From the patrol car behind her, a uniformed officer stepped out with an unmistakable swagger. The man was tall, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut that seemed to emphasize the hard angles of his face. His nameplate read Wallace, and the gleam of his badge was polished to a shine perhaps a little too much. His stride was heavy, deliberate, and as he approached, the setting sun caught the shadow on his face, casting his expression in a half-lit sneer. The silence in the air shifted, no longer peaceful, but dense, pregnant with an unsaid power dynamic. Imani rolled her window down halfway, her chin tilted with professional courtesy. Her eyes, warm but unreadable, met his. Officer Wallace stopped just shy of her door, his stance wide, one hand on his belt near the holster, the other tapping against a flashlight clipped to his side. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't smile. "License and registration," he said, flatly, his voice a few decibels too loud, a little too clipped, less like a request and more like a demand. "Of course," Officer Imani said calmly, her voice smooth, deliberate, with no trace of tension. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Her tone was neither confrontational nor deferential, just direct, a question asked with the air of someone fully aware of her rights. Wallace's eyes didn't leave her face. "We'll get to that after I see your papers," he said, his jaw tightening. Without breaking eye contact, Imani opened her glove compartment slowly, deliberately, every move calculated to prevent escalation. She retrieved her license and registration, handing them over without hesitation. Wallace took them with a practiced motion, but his gaze lingered, not on the documents, on her face, her clothes, her car. a long look that seemed to reach beyond the windshield and into judgment. A thin silence crept between them, the kind that didn't feel like a pause but a provocation. Wallace finally spoke. "You rolled through that light a little quick," he said, flipping her license in his hand like a coin. "Didn't look like a full stop from my angle." Imani's brow arched just slightly. "With all due respect, officer, I stopped the vehicle as soon as the light turned red. I was not in a hurry." Her voice was calm but firm, enunciated with the kind of clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Wallace let out a half-chuckle, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Huh," he said, squinting. "You from around here?" Imani's gaze didn't falter. "The address is on my license," she said, her voice still perfectly composed. "Right," he said, but made no move to look down at the license again. Instead, he stepped just a little closer enough to make the interaction personal. "Funny," he added, his tone turning dry. "You don't look like the folks I usually see driving through this part of town in a car like this." That sentence hung in the air like smoke, transparent but poisonous. It wasn't about her suit, her car, or even her stop at the light. It was about something deeper, darker, and old as the country they both stood in. Imani didn't respond right away. She let the silence build, then replied, "Is that supposed to mean something?" Officer Wallace shrugged, tapping the ID card against the roof of her car. "Just doing my job. You never know who's who these days." Imani's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Something told her this wasn't just a routine stop. It was a performance one meant to assert control, to probe for weakness. Her hands still rested on the wheel, palms open. There was no aggression in her posture, no resistance. But her presence, her refusal to shrink, was to men like Wallace resistance enough. The soft breeze that drifted through the window carried with it the smell of nearby jasmine, almost ironic in its sweetness as the tension thickened like a fog. Hawthorne, so tranquil a moment before, now stood suspended, caught in the stillness of a confrontation that was no longer about a stoplight or traffic law, but about power perception and the reckoning that was quietly forming behind Imani's steady gaze. And somewhere nearby, unnoticed for now, a bystander named Andre Lewis had paused at the corner phone in hand, already recording, drawn not just by flashing lights, but by something he'd seen too many times to ignore. The first move had been made, and there would be no turning back. The hum of the city faded into the background as tension crystallized in the air around them. The glowing horizon of Hawthorne, once tranquil, now felt distant and unreachable, as if the world beyond the curb had slipped into another dimension, one untouched by siren's suspicion or the slow, methodical dismantling of dignity. The street was quiet, but alive with unspoken energy. A couple walking their dog across the road paused mid-stride, eyes flicking curiously toward the patrol car. The dog whimpered, sensing something its owners couldn't articulate. Andre Lewis, still standing near the edge of the sidewalk, held his phone steady, his brows furrowed, lips tight. He'd seen enough to know what was happening, even if he hadn't heard the words. Brent Wallace, meanwhile, leaned slightly closer to the window of Imani's Tesla, the creases in his forehead deepening as his mouth curved into a smirk that was less friendly and more invasive. His eyes flicked to her collarbone, then to the watch on her wrist, before landing back on her face with a glint of entitlement that had long since grown unchecked in him. "Step out of the car," he said suddenly, his voice low, almost casual, like he was asking someone to hand him a napkin. Imani blinked once, the only outward reaction she gave to a request that was as unnecessary as it was strategic. "Excuse me?" she asked, not with challenge, but with clarity, making sure the words echoed. Brent tilted his head, jaw tightening slightly, as though mildly inconvenienced by her tone. "I said step out of the car." He repeated louder this time, the casual veneer peeling back to reveal a sharpened edge beneath. "Unless you're trying to escalate something." Imani kept her hands on the wheel, unmoved. "I've complied with everything you asked, officer. You haven't told me what I'm being stopped for, and now you're asking me to leave my vehicle. I'd like to understand why." Brent let out a theatrical sigh, the kind designed to show he was growing tired of being disrespected. He stepped back just enough to plant both feet, shoulder-width apart arms folding across his chest in a pose that screamed manufactured authority. Sometimes he said voice, carrying with a performative clarity that suggested he was speaking for an invisible audience. People think that just because they can talk smooth and wear fancy suits, they don't have to follow instructions. But out here, you follow my lead. Got it. Imani didn't blink. Her face was the picture of calm, but beneath the surface, something coiled. Her silence wasn't submission, it was precision calculated restraint. If there's no legal basis for this request, I respectfully decline to exit the vehicle. I'm not under arrest. I haven't committed a crime. Brent's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but it lacked all warmth. It was the kind of smile that stretched the skin too tight, that said more about the person's hunger for dominance than it did about humor. "You trying to play lawyer with me?" he asked, stepping close, again so close the brim of his hat cast a shadow over her dashboard. "You know what happens when people don't listen," the first time Imani met his eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." Brent tapped the roof of her car twice hard. Last chance, step out of the car. A sharp breeze slipped through the cracked window, lifting the collar of Imani's blouse ever so slightly. She slowly reached down, not toward the door handle, but toward the center console. "I'm unlocking the door," she said, making sure every syllable was clear so that no one thinks I'm resisting. Brent didn't respond. His eyes were narrow slits now, jaw clenched so tightly his neck tensed visibly beneath his collar. He wanted resistance. He was baiting her, needling her into reacting anything to justify the power he was so desperate to wield. But Imani wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She opened the door, straightened her jacket, and stepped out slowly, heels clicking gently on the pavement like the start of a metronome. Her posture was straight shoulders, square arms at her side, not in defiance, but in dignity. Brent looked her up and down with a sneer that lingered too long. "Turn around, hands on the hood." She turned, deliberate, careful, placing her palms on the cool metal surface of her car. It gleamed faintly under the dying sunlight, her reflection barely visible in its polished finish. Brent came up behind her, his boots stomping with unnecessary force, each step designed to intimidate. He moved in closer than protocol required, and began his search not swift or professional, but slow, lingering, as though every gesture was a test, a power play dressed in the thinnest veneer of procedure. "You wear perfume?" he asked, tone oily. "Smells expensive. Didn't peg you for the type." Imani didn't respond. She stood still, her silence screaming louder than any retort. She'd heard that kind of tone before, in hallways, in boardrooms, on sidewalks, late at night. It wasn't curiosity. It was mockery, coated in the suggestion of something darker. Brent finished the search with a grunt of disappointment. "You're clean," he muttered, "for now." He stepped back, the gravel beneath his boots crunching like broken glass in the quiet. Imani turned to face him slowly, carefully. "I've been clean from the start, officer. You're the only one trying to find dirt where there isn't any." Brent's nostrils flared. "You're getting real close to obstruction," he snapped. "No," she corrected calmly. "I'm getting real close to asking why I was stopped in the first place. You still haven't answered that." He took a step forward again, fists tightening, the flush of anger blooming across his cheeks like an uncontrolled fire. "You think just because you talk calm and act smart, you're better than me." "No," Imani said, her voice even softer now. "I just know the law." "Do you?" Brent's jaw shifted. His eyes twitched, searching hers for any crack, any sign of fear, but finding only polished steel. He was used to people backing down, used to their eyes shifting away, their words folding under his stare. But this woman didn't flinch, and something about that, her calm, her certainty, was eating at him. He stared at her for a moment longer, lips parted as if to throw out one more threat, but no words came. He was faltering, and she could see it. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't move. She simply stood and let his reflection twist in the mirror of her restraint. Behind him from the sidewalk, Andre's phone was still recording, a quiet witness in the growing shadow of a system long overdue for reckoning. The breeze picked up again, rustling the leaves in the trees overhead, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Something had shifted. The balance, the control. The ground beneath Officer Brent Wallace's boots was no longer steady, and Imani Carter wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Imani stood still beside her car, the smooth surface of the hood cooling beneath her fingertips as the final rays of sunlight melted into dusk. The air had grown heavier, not from heat, but from the weight of everything unsaid. Brent Wallace loomed a few steps away, arms crossed his chest, rising and falling, with an exaggerated sense of control, like a man too used to winning arguments through volume and presence. But Imani wasn't a rookie. She wasn't intimidated. She was calculating, patient, an ocean under glass. She turned slowly to face him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, clearer, like two searchlights slicing through fog. Her voice broke the silence, low but deliberate, each word chosen like a precise incision. "Officer Wallace," she said, "your duty is to protect and serve, not provoke and humiliate. A routine stop shouldn't feel like an interrogation, and your questions have nothing to do with my driving. If you're unclear about procedure, I suggest you review the policy manual on traffic stops, particularly the section about probable cause and respectful conduct." Brent blinked as if he'd been slapped, not by the tone, but by the audacity, his jaw, clenched lips tightening into a sneer. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice rising. "You think you can stand there and lecture me? Who do you think you are?" The words spilled out, laced with disbelief and insult, like a challenge tossed at her feet. He stepped closer, his boots grinding into the pavement, his breath hitching with thinly veiled rage. "You got a badge I don't know about, some fancy title that gives you the right to talk down to me." Imani didn't react. She let the question linger, hanging in the air between them, like smoke. Her silence wasn't empty, it was loaded. Then she replied, her voice calm, almost tender, in contrast to his growing hostility. "I think I'm a citizen, and in this country that should be enough." Her eyes didn't flinch. "Every person deserves respect, officer. That's not a privilege, that's a principle. And if you've forgotten that, maybe it's time someone reminded you." Brent laughed, loud, sharp, the kind of laugh that wasn't amusement, but aggression in disguise. He shook his head, staring at her like she was a child pretending to understand the world. "You're unbelievable," he spat. "You think I give respect just because someone dresses well and throws around big words? You don't know how it works out here. I am the law on this street. You step into my scene, you play by my rules. You don't like that." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low snarl. "You can take it up with someone who gives a damn." Imani didn't move, not an inch. But inside, something shifted. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. A quiet storm rolled behind her eyes, measured and ancient, the kind born from watching systems fail the people they claim to protect. She'd heard this voice before. Different face, same tone, same entitlement, same rot. She exhaled softly and reached into her blazer pocket. "Fine," she said quietly. "Let's play by your rules. Let's show you who gives a damn." The wind had shifted, and Officer Brent Wallace could feel it. Not in the way a breeze rustled through leaves or stirred loose debris across the pavement, but in the way power, the kind he was used to wielding unchecked, suddenly slipped through his fingers like sand. Imani Carter stood there, unwavering, a monument of self-control and quiet authority, her gaze fixed on him, not with rage, but with precision, with something colder and far more dangerous to a man like Brent Knowledge. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was command. She had endured his assumptions, tolerated his provocations, allowed him to play his game to its inevitable end. And now she decided to take action. Imani reached slowly into the inside pocket of her blazer. Her movement was steady, non-threatening, but commanding in its own right. Her voice followed, low and deliberate, cutting through the space between them, like the crisp edge of a blade. "I'm going to retrieve something now. I don't want to be misunderstood." Brent stiffened instinctively, his hand twitching near the holster on his right hip. But he didn't draw, not because he trusted her, but because something in her tone told him he'd already lost this exchange, and that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. Imani withdrew a slim black wallet from her jacket, opened it, and held it up slowly. The light from the setting sun caught the metallic glint of the badge inside, reflecting briefly off Brent's sunglasses, as if mocking him with its cold gleam. "Imani Carter," she said, every syllable weighted, deliberate. "Chief of Internal Affairs, Hawthorne Police Department." Brent's eyes locked on the badge, his pupils dilating slightly, as if struggling to focus on the reality staring him down. His jaw slackened for a fraction of a second before snapping shut again, the muscles at his temples twitching with restrained panic. "What?" he muttered, the sound barely audible. "You heard me." Imani continued, her voice now edged with something sterner, a tone that belonged in interrogation rooms and disciplinary hearings. "I oversee all investigations into officer misconduct in this jurisdiction. That includes yours." Her words didn't rise in volume, didn't shake with emotion. They were simply facts delivered like the final gavel in a courtroom. "And tonight, Officer Wallace, you've given me more than enough to open a file." Brent opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For once, the man who had so often wielded his badge like a weapon had nothing to say. The performance was over. The smirk was gone. In its place stood a man stripped bare by consequence, reduced to the uncomfortable weight of accountability. Behind them, the street had begun to reanimate. The couple with the dog had started walking again, casting quick glances over their shoulders. A car drove slowly past the driver, rubbernecking at the odd tableau of a uniformed officer standing stiff while a woman in a navy suit held out a badge. Andre Lewis lowered his phone but didn't stop recording. He knew better than to turn away when truth finally stepped out of the shadows. Imani didn't move. She held the badge in place a moment longer, letting its presence sink into Brent like slow poison. You stopped me without cause. You failed to articulate any legal justification. You escalated without provocation. You searched my person without probable cause. And you did all of that while deliberately ignoring every standard of professionalism expected from someone in your position. She paused, letting each accusation hang heavy in the air. You should be very careful, Officer Wallace, because the only thing standing between you and a civil rights lawsuit right now is the fact that I believe in fixing the system before burning it down. Brent was breathing heavier now, the realization setting in like a slow suffocation. I didn't know who you were, he said, trying to recover some ground, but his voice betrayed him. Shaky, unsure, small. Imani lowered the badge, slipped it calmly back into her jacket, then stepped forward, not in threat, but in gravitas. That's the problem, she said. You don't treat people with respect because it's right. You only show restraint when you think someone matters. Brent's shoulders hunched slightly, as if the weight of her words had landed physically. His fingers fidgeted at his belt, and for a moment he looked not like the enforcer of the law he imagined himself to be, but like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam. Imani turned, walked slowly back to the driver's side of her car, and opened the door. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Expect a formal inquiry to be launched by morning, she said flatly. You may want to review your past reports before then. Thoroughly. She stepped back into her Tesla, closed the door with a gentle click, and for a moment sat in silence, hands resting on the steering wheel. Brent still stood where she'd left him, frozen, his authority crumbling like ash. Andre finally tucked his phone away, his eyes meeting Imani's through the windshield with a subtle nod of respect. He didn't know her title before, but he knew power when he saw it, and tonight it hadn't come from a uniform. The Tesla hummed quietly back to life, and as it pulled away from the curb, the city began to move again. The sun had dipped below the skyline now, and the streetlights buzzed to life one by one. But the real light one that revealed the cracks in the system had already been turned on, and it wasn't going out anytime soon. Across town, as the last light faded from the sky, a computer screen in Imani's office blinked silently in the dark. The name Brent Wallace sat at the top of a file that hadn't been opened in 2 years. But by dawn, it would be the most scrutinized document in the department. Because tonight wasn't just about a badge or a car stop. It was the start of something much bigger. And Officer Wallace had no idea what storm he had just invited into his world. The next day, by the time Imani Carter pulled into the underground parking garage beneath the Hawthorne Police Department headquarters, the city had long since surrendered to night. The concrete ceiling above her hummed with fluorescent light, casting pale shadows over the silver elevator doors and the worn lines of designated staff parking. Her Tesla's engine powered down with a quiet sigh, but inside her chest tension still pulsed like a quiet alarm that refused to shut off. She sat there for a moment, both hands resting on the steering wheel, her mind replaying every second of the traffic stop, Brent Wallace's sneering face, the way his voice had dropped into that hungry tone, the look of momentary terror when he realized who she was. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered abuse hiding behind a badge, but this time it was personal. This time she wasn't just a witness. She was the one with the power to respond. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking crisply across the garage floor, the sound echoing off the cold concrete. A janitor pushing a mop cart paused briefly to nod in recognition, but Imani's face was distant, already focused. She took the elevator up to the 7th floor internal affairs, and as the doors slid open, the sterile chill of bureaucracy greeted her like a familiar companion. The floor was mostly empty, save for the faint glow of computer monitors in the bullpen and the muffled whirring of printers in the background. She didn't wait. She strode directly into her office, flipped on the light, and pulled up her chair in one seamless motion. Her desktop blinked awake. Imani typed quickly, her fingers tapping with purpose, bringing up the department's internal records management system. The name she typed, Brent Wallace, appeared instantly highlighted in bold. She opened the file. What she saw didn't surprise her. but it angered her. There were 8 complaints against Wallace in the past 4 years. 8. 5 of them involving traffic stops, 3 involving use of force, all dismissed. One complainant, a teenage black boy, had alleged that Wallace threw him against a patrol car for looking suspicious. The report noted a lack of sufficient body cam evidence, and the case had been quietly closed. Another listed verbal abuse during a stop involving a Latina nurse driving home after an overnight shift. The investigation had lacked corroborating witness testimony. Imani's eyes narrowed at the phrasing. She'd seen it too many times before. Wallace wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom. And this file wasn't just a record of misconduct. It was a map of systemic negligence. She hit print. A dozen pages rolled out from the corner of her desk. She stapled them, slipped them into a manila folder, and scribbled one word on the tab in red ink: Wallace, immediate action. The next morning, the building felt 10 degrees colder. Even the sun seemed reluctant to shine through the frosted windows of HQ. Imani stood before the office of Police Chief Harold Green, a seasoned man with graying temples and a politician's composure. His door, always slightly ajar, now sat open wider than usual, a silent invitation and perhaps a signal of concern. She stepped in. The chief looked up from his desk, his sharp blue eyes already expecting her. "Imani," he said with a nod, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I heard there was an incident last night involving Wallace." Imani sat down slowly, placing the thick folder on his desk without a word. She waited. Green opened it, scanning the pages, and as his eyes moved down each entry, the lines around his mouth deepened. "These are serious," he murmured, but most of them were handled at the time. Were they? Imani asked, her voice calm but edged. Or were they buried, justified, ignored because they didn't scream loud enough? Green sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You know how difficult it is to discipline officers when the complaints are unsubstantiated. Unsubstantiated doesn't mean unfounded," she replied, "and yesterday I witnessed it firsthand. The man pulled me over for nothing. He tried to intimidate me. He touched his weapon. He searched me. And he did it with that same grin I've seen in the files, like he knew he could get away with it." Green didn't respond immediately. He rubbed his temple, clearly weighing more than just the contents of the folder. "You realize what you're asking for?" "I'm not asking," Imani said, her tone flattening. "I'm reporting and recommending. Full investigation, disciplinary review, immediate reassignment until the case is complete. And if we're serious about change, this isn't where it stops. Wallace is just one part of it." There was a pause, then Green leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You'll stir up the hornet's nest. You know that, right? Wallace has friends. There are a lot of veterans who see this kind of pushback as betrayal." Imani met his gaze, unflinching. "Then let them be uncomfortable. Comfort is what's gotten us here." That afternoon, word spread fast. Whispers trickled through the hallways, over the stale coffee in the break room, between the lockers in the locker room. Officers glanced at each other as if the walls were listening. Some muttered things under their breath. Others said nothing, but their stares said plenty. Lieutenant Mark Doyle, a 24-year veteran and longtime friend of Brent Wallace, cornered Imani by the vending machines, arms crossed and voice low but seething. "You trying to destroy this department from the inside out," he growled. "That man's been on the force longer than you've had that shiny title. You're going after him like he's some rookie punk." Imani didn't flinch. He abused his power mark, and the only thing worse than a bad cop is the system that protects him. "Careful," Doyle spat. "You start digging too deep, and you'll find things you don't like." "I'm not afraid of what I'll find," she said. "I'm afraid of what'll happen if no one looks." That night, after most of the staff had gone home, a young officer named Maya Collins, fresh from the academy, barely 6 months on the force, knocked gently on Imani's open office door. She looked hesitant but determined. "Chief Carter," she said softly, I heard what happened with Wallace, and I wanted to say thank you." Imani looked up, her face softening slightly. "For what?" "For not letting it slide," Maya said. "I've seen how he treats people, civilians, other officers. Everyone just lets it happen. I joined the force to help people not to turn a blind eye." Imani nodded slowly. "Then make sure you never lose that clarity, because you'll be tested." Maya offered a small, nervous smile, then turned and disappeared into the dim hallway, leaving Imani alone with her thoughts, the buzz of overhead lights, and the quiet hum of a department that, after years of silence, had finally been forced to listen. The wheels were turning now, slowly, loudly, but undeniably. And Brent Wallace, his days of unchecked power were numbered. The following week arrived with the weight of a storm that had been brewing for years, silent, ignored, but no longer avoidable. Inside Hawthorne Police Department, the tension was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It had risen like floodwater. The air had grown heavy in the hallways. Conversations dropped to whispers when Imani Carter walked by. Doors that used to stand open now stayed shut, and the faces that once greeted her with nods or measured smiles now turned cold or indifferent. The sense of isolation wasn't new to Imani. She had walked through fire before, but this was different. This wasn't just resistance, it was defense. The walls of an institution protecting itself. In the briefing room on the third floor, a mandatory department-wide meeting had been called. Rows of officers and uniformed detectives in rolled-up sleeves, lieutenants with their arms crossed, and captains tapping pens impatiently filled the space. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of old coffee and nerves lingered like mildew. The walls of the room, painted in a faded gray, had witnessed decades of silence, complicity, and whispered warnings. Today, they would witness something else. Imani stood at the front, flanked by Police Chief Harold Green and Deputy Commissioner Evelyn Price, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for holding grudges and keeping receipts. A large screen behind them displayed two words in stark white text: Departmental Accountability Initiative. The phrase alone was enough to trigger eye rolls and heavy sighs from the back row. Imani took a slow breath before speaking, letting the quiet settle fully before cutting through it. "Thank you for coming." She began, her voice steady but firm. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries. You've all heard about what happened last week. You've heard the names, the arguments, the accusations. Some of you are angry. Some of you are afraid. And some of you are watching, waiting to see if this is just another performance." There was a rustle of movement, a chair scraping the floor, a cough from the corner, the slow sip of coffee from a steel thermos. Imani's gaze scanned the room slowly. "Let me be clear," she continued. "This is not about one officer. This is about a pattern of behavior, a pattern of silence, a pattern of trust eroded every time someone abuses power and walks away untouched." From the second row, Lieutenant Mark Doyle leaned back with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. "We're not perfect," he muttered just loud enough for nearby officers to hear. "Doesn't mean we're the enemy." Imani heard him, didn't flinch. "No one is calling you the enemy," she said, eyes locking onto his. "But if you protect those who violate their oath, you are not protecting the people. You are protecting your comfort. And comfort," she said, "has never been the foundation of justice." A murmur moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Officers shifted, some with discomfort, others with quiet respect. Near the back, Officer Maya Collins sat straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes gleamed not with fear, but something closer to pride. Imani clicked a remote. The screen behind her changed now, displaying bar graphs, internal stats, and a list of uninvestigated complaints over the past 5 years. The data was damning. One column in particular, excessive force against minority civilians, stood taller than the others, like an accusation no one could dodge. "We're not here to point fingers, Deputy Commissioner Price," said, stepping forward, her voice clipped and clear. "We're here to fix the culture. We're launching a top-to-bottom audit of officer conduct, complaint handling, and training protocols. We're bringing in external reviewers. And, yes, there will be consequences." A heavy silence fell. Consequences. It wasn't a word this department was used to hearing out loud. Doyle stood, voice firm. "So what? You want us to crucify a guy like Wallace for a bad stop? He's made mistakes, sure, but he's also made arrests that kept this city safer." Imani didn't hesitate. "No one is above the law," she said. "Not Wallace, not you, not me. And if keeping the city safe comes at the cost of violating someone's rights, then we've failed in a far greater way." Another officer, Detective Elena Ruiz, mid-30s Latina, respected and quiet, spoke up from the side. "I've worked with Wallace," she said, her voice calm, "and I've seen him cross the line more than once. Nobody said anything. Nobody wanted to stir trouble. I didn't either. But after what happened to Chief Carter, maybe it's time we stop being afraid of our own silence." That admission struck harder than any policy slide. Ruiz had a reputation steady, no-nonsense, by the book. If she was willing to speak, something was shifting. A small ripple, but real. From the edge of the room, Sergeant Joseph Arkin, nearing retirement, rubbed his beard and muttered, "Maybe she's right. Maybe we've gotten too used to ignoring what's right in front of us. Not everyone agreed. Some officers stormed out after the meeting. Others exchanged bitter whispers in the locker room, casting glances at Imani as if she were an infection. But she didn't need everyone to approve. She needed the truth to break through the concrete, and cracks had already started to show. Later that evening, Imani sat alone in her office, the city lights painting orange streaks across the window blinds. Her desk was covered in files. Wallace's history internal audits, incident reports long buried. She thumbed through a complaint filed by a mother who said her teenage son was slammed against a patrol car for jaywalking. No body cam footage, no disciplinary action, just another entry in a system too comfortable with forgetting. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Maya stepped in again, holding a thick folder. "These are the reports you requested on unresolved stop and search complaints," she said. "I cross-referenced them with neighborhood demographics like you asked." Imani took the folder and looked up at the young officer. "Thank you," she said quietly. Maya hesitated, then spoke. "Some of the guys, they're saying you're tearing this department apart." Imani offered a tired smile, 1 part sadness, 2 parts steel. "Sometimes you have to break the silence before you can build something stronger." Maya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'm with you." As the door closed behind her, Imani leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city, its buildings stoic, its streets busy, its people waiting. Reform wasn't a word you whispered in safe meetings. It was something you fought for piece by piece against every voice that said, "This is just how things are." And tonight, for the first time in a long while, she believed it might actually be possible, because the truth wasn't just being spoken, it was being heard. Absolutely de la fienban mo rong vachin swakwafan 5 bao gom chi tiet ve video qua Andre Louis lan trien tren mang kung voi fan ung man me tu kong dong vatak dong qua no len noibo so kan satat kaduok viet lien ma gyun guyen fong kach ke chuyen de kam su kich tin vasa hoi nu kak fan truok. That same morning, as the department braced for internal tension, the outside world had already begun to stir with fire. In a quiet cafe on the south side of Hawthorne, a group of college students huddled around a phone, brows furrowed in disbelief. In a law office downtown, a young black paralegal stared at her computer screen, mouth agape. And across hundreds of phones, tablets, and desktop monitors, a video barely 3 minutes long was being shared, reposted, and dissected with growing fury. The caption read, "Black woman stopped searched and disrespected for nothing. She stayed calm. He got humbled. This is what quiet strength looks like." It was the footage Andre Louis had captured the night of the stop, raw, steady, and impossible to misinterpret. It opened with the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off Imani's car, captured Brent Wallace's smug tone as he barked orders, and panned slowly as she asked in a calm, measured voice why she was being pulled over. It showed his posture, his body language, his authority weaponized with casual cruelty. It caught the moment he demanded she step out, the slow way she complied, and the deliberate quiet fire in her eyes when she finally revealed her badge. The internet had seen videos like it before, but this one was different. This time, the woman didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't run. She stood tall. She spoke with dignity. And she turned the entire narrative on its head. By noon, the video had surpassed 500,000 views. By evening, it had hit 1.2 million. Hashtags like #ImaniCarter, #respect is a requirement, and #check the badge too were trending locally. Comment sections flooded with praise, outrage, and solidarity. Influencers reposted the clip with statements like, "This is why we say representation matters, and calm doesn't mean weak. It means knowing your power." But the most powerful responses came not from celebrities, but from ordinary people. A single mother named Tasha posted, "She stood how I wish I could have stood when they stopped me in front of my son." A former Marine wrote, "I wore a badge once. Imani Carter reminded me what it's supposed to mean." A high school senior in East Hawthorne posted a video of himself tearing up and said, "She's the reason I still want to become a cop, because I want to be the change." And the comments kept coming. Stories poured in. Photos, letters, personal accounts of fear of injustice, of being stopped and not being seen as human. Imani had become more than a chief or a figure in a viral clip. She had become a symbol, an image of quiet defiance and undeniable competence. Within the department, the reaction was seismic. Phones at headquarters rang nonstop calls from local news outlets, from national reporters, from watchdog organizations, and from angry citizens demanding accountability. The Hawthorne PD social media accounts were flooded with criticism. Public trust, already fragile, was now hanging by a thread. During the afternoon departmental meeting, as Imani presented her initiative, Chief Harold Green's phone buzzed constantly. He turned it over once, twice, ignoring it with increasing frustration. When the meeting adjourned, he pulled Imani aside into his office. His face was pale, his voice sharp but uneasy. "This video," he said, "has turned everything upside down." Imani didn't flinch. "Good. The mayor called me twice this morning. There's going to be a press conference, community meetings, maybe even civil action. The media's circling like bloodhounds." Imani met his eyes, cool and controlled. "Then maybe this department will finally be forced to listen." The chief rubbed his temples. "You realize what this means for you. They're going to target you next, not just from outside, but from within." "I'm not here to be liked," she said. "I'm here to make it right." Outside the office, the ripple continued. Veteran officers like Mark Doyle responded with rage, blaming Imani for airing dirty laundry and bringing shame to the department. Wallace, suspended with full pay, pending investigation, refused to comment publicly, but word spread that he'd hired a private attorney. The union released a generic statement, tiptoeing around accountability, citing protocol and officer safety. But the new recruits, the younger officers, the ones who had watched the video in silence, some with guilt, others with recognition, they began to reach out. Quiet emails, folded notes. A few even stopped by Imani's office just to say, "Thank you." By the end of the day, the video had reached 2 million views. In the evening, as the sun bled orange through the horizon and the lights of Hawthorne flickered on, one by one, Imani stood in her apartment by the window, phone in hand, scrolling through messages. One stood out. It was from Andre Lewis himself. "Ma'am, I don't know if you remember me, but I filmed what happened. I just want you to know. I didn't record you because you were in trouble. I recorded because you looked like someone who was about to make a difference. I was right. Thank you." Imani placed the phone down, heart heavy but stronger than it had been in days. She stared out at the city, knowing full well that the path ahead was steep, ugly, and dangerous. But somewhere out there, people were watching, people were speaking, and more importantly, people were beginning to believe. The silence was breaking, and there would be no putting it back. The week following the video's eruption online was a whirlwind of press inquiries, departmental turmoil, and sharpened lines drawn both inside and outside the Hawthorne Police Department. The city's pulse had changed. There was a new rhythm in the air, faster, heavier, louder. Citizens weren't just watching anymore. They were demanding. The front steps of the precinct had turned into a daily gathering place where protest signs bobbed in the breeze and chants echoed through the downtown blocks. Justice for all, not just for some. They shouted, "Imani speaks. We believe." The faces in the crowd were mixed, young activists, retired veterans, church mothers, and students, all different, all united. And their eyes, all of them, were focused on one building. Inside that building, change was being forced into motion. Imani Carter sat in a wood-paneled meeting room just off the chief's corridor, a room normally reserved for dry procedural reviews and risk management briefings. But today, it had been transformed into a staging ground for something far more serious, the official internal disciplinary hearing for Officer Brent Wallace. The long, rectangular table stretched out before her, polished and cold, surrounded by 6 members of the Conduct Oversight Panel, each selected from a cross-section of senior officers, legal advisors, and community liaisons. The atmosphere was thick, like the kind of air right before a summer thunderstorm. Everyone knew the pressure was about to break. Brent Wallace sat at the far end of the table, flanked by his attorney, a gray-haired ex-prosecutor named Curtis Vale, who had a permanent frown etched into his face. Brent wore his uniform pressed and starched, as if its presentation could scrub away the rot beneath. His expression flickered between indifference and quiet disdain, but Imani saw the flickers, the subtle twitch of a jaw, the tight grip on the folder in front of him. He wasn't as unshaken as he wanted them to believe. Across from him sat Community Representative Karen Osei, a local teacher and youth mentor whose presence on the panel had been requested by several civic organizations. Beside her, Captain Neil Vasquez, a 30-year vet with tired eyes and a strong sense of duty. On Imani's side, Deputy Commissioner Evelyn Price sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her, watching everything with hawk-like precision. No one spoke for a long moment. It was Imani who broke the silence. The record will show this is the official hearing to determine disciplinary action against Officer Brent Wallace, badge number 62347, regarding the events of last Tuesday, as well as prior complaints previously closed without action. All evidence, including citizen complaints officer conduct reports and third-party video footage, has been reviewed. Curtis Vale immediately cleared his throat. Let me state for the record that Officer Wallace has served with distinction for over 15 years. While mistakes may have been made, we question the proportionality of this hearing and the viral nature of the evidence being used to judge him. Karen Osei cut in her voice calm but unwavering. The video may be viral, Mr. Vale, but that doesn't make it untrue. In fact, it's the most unfiltered direct evidence we've seen in this case. And let's not pretend this is about one incident. This is about all of them. Imani didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply opened a folder and began reading. Complaint hash 1187 verbal intimidation of a black teenager during a stop for loitering. Complaint dismissed. Hash 1242 threatening language during a traffic stop involving a nurse driving home after night shift. No follow-up. Hash 1309 use of unnecessary force during a minor detainment. No investigation due to lack of video evidence. She placed the folder down. Her voice dropped slightly now, low and firm. But this time there was a camera. Brent's attorney raised a hand. We object to the characterization of Officer Wallace's tone and intentions. Traffic stops are inherently tense. Officers often need to take control of situations to protect themselves and others. Imani turned her eyes to Brent. Is that what you were doing? Protecting yourself when you searched me without cause, when you demanded answers to questions that had nothing to do with a traffic violation, when you told me you were the law? Brent said nothing. His fingers tapped silently on the table. Imani leaned forward slightly. Or were you just trying to remind someone who looked like me that the street belonged to you? There was silence again, this time heavier. Even Captain Vasquez looked away briefly. Deputy Commissioner Price finally spoke. Officer Wallace, you've been given the opportunity to address these concerns directly. Would you like to offer your explanation? Brent's jaw flexed. I acted within protocol, he said. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she was internal affairs. If I had, you would have acted differently, Karen Osei asked sharply, raising an eyebrow. Brent paused. I would have handled the situation with more care. And that's the problem, Imani said, voice now sharp as glass. Respect shouldn't depend on someone's title. It should be the baseline. Outside the room in the hallway, just beyond the glass wall, younger officers hovered. Maya Collins stood among them, peeking in through the slats in the blinds, her face a mix of tension and pride. A sergeant beside her muttered under his breath, "That's what happens when you think the badge makes you untouchable." Another officer replied, "Nah, this isn't just about Wallace. This is about all of us. Things are changing." Back in the room, the panel members exchanged quiet words. Then came the final statement. Karen Osei's voice was firm. Based on the findings presented, the documented pattern of behavior, and the clear abuse of authority in this incident, we recommend indefinite suspension from active duty. Further, we support a mandatory ethics retraining program, psychological evaluation, and review of Officer Wallace's past cases for patterns of misconduct. Brent's face flushed. He opened his mouth, but Curtis placed a firm hand on his wrist. "We'll be appealing," the lawyer said, but there was no conviction behind the words, just the brittle pride of a man who had lost the upper hand. As the room emptied, Imani remained seated. She watched the others file out, some shaking their heads, others quietly, nodding to her in acknowledgement. Captain Vasquez paused by her side. "It's long overdue," he said softly. "What you're doing, it matters." When she stepped into the corridor, officers quieted. Some looked away. But others, like Maya, stepped toward her, a rare flicker of hope in their eyes. "You stood up when no one else would," Maya said. "Now we know we can too." Imani gave a small nod. "Then make sure you do." And with that, she walked forward, not away from the fight, but deeper into it, because she knew this wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And it had only just begun. 2 weeks after the disciplinary hearing, the city of Hawthorne found itself transformed not in spectacle, but in atmosphere. There was a palpable shift, like the first breeze after a long, suffocating heat wave. The streets still bustled with buses, sirens still pierced the air, and neighbors still waved across chain-link fences, but beneath it all was a new hum of conversation. Conversations in barbershops, in churches, and school parking lots about power, fairness, change. And at the center of it, willingly or not, stood Imani Carter. On a warm Friday evening, the Hawthorne Civic Auditorium glowed beneath string lights and banners that read, "Community and Courage, a Night of Truth and Transformation." Hundreds gathered beneath its arched ceiling rows of folding chairs filled with resident students, faith leaders, local business owners, activists, journalists. The room buzzed with anticipation, not the nervous kind, but the kind that comes when people sense something meaningful is about to happen. The air smelled faintly of popcorn and new carpet, a strange but comforting blend of the everyday and the extraordinary. On stage, a modest podium waited, flanked by 2 large projection screens. Behind it, a long table held water bottles, stacked pamphlets labeled "Justice Starts Here," and a wooden plaque that read "Hawthorne Community Partnership Council." The lights dimmed slightly as Mayor Sienna Brookstone stepped onto the stage, her burgundy blazer crisp under the spotlight. Tonight, she said, her voice calm but caring, "We recognize that our city has been forced to confront itself, and we have many people to thank for that. But there is one voice in particular who stood when it was difficult, who spoke not only for herself but for those who've never had the chance to speak. Please welcome Chief Imani Carter." Applause rose like a wave, slow, then rising, then erupting into a full standing ovation. Imani walked onto the stage, every step steady, every movement composed. Her gray suit was simple, clean, but powerful in the way that it did not try to impress. It simply demanded attention by being exact. Her face betrayed no nerves, but her heart beat with a quiet tremor, not of fear, but of the weight she carried. The weight of every name in every report, the weight of the video, the hearing, the aftermath, and now this moment. She stood at the podium, took a breath, and let the room settle. Then she began. "When I joined Internal Affairs," she said, "I didn't do it to be popular. I didn't do it to be feared. I did it because I believed in accountability. Because I believed that wearing a badge should mean you hold yourself to the highest standard, not the bare minimum." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Imani continued, her voice low, clear, deliberate. "These past few weeks, we've seen what happens when one moment pulls back the curtain. We've seen pain. We've seen silence crack. But we've also seen something else. We've seen truth. And truth once seen can't be unseen." She paused. On one screen behind her, the video of the traffic stop with Brent Wallace flickered silently. No sound, just images. Her hands on the wheel. His face. The moment she showed her badge, the room watched without blinking. Imani turned slightly, gesturing to it. "Many of you saw this video online. For some of you, it was shocking. For others, it was familiar. Too familiar. You saw what I've seen more times than I care to count. But I want you to understand something," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This video doesn't just show misconduct. It shows a culture that we are now tearing down, brick by brick." In the front row, Maya Collins sat beside her mother, who clutched a tissue in one hand and her daughter's wrist in the other. Maya's eyes never left Imani. Next to them sat Andre Lewis, wearing a simple black hoodie with the words, "Respect is a right," embroidered across the front. He had turned down every media request, but came tonight without hesitation. Imani raised her hand gently. Her gaze swept across the sea of faces before her, some hopeful, some weary, many broken, but still standing. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice growing more intimate, more personal. "I want to tell you about a boy named Jordan," she said. 17 years old, honor roll student, captain of his track team. 2 months ago, he was walking home from school when he was stopped by an officer who said he fit a description. They searched his backpack, emptied his pockets, pushed him against a patrol car. No apology, no explanation, just suspicion turned into humiliation. Jordan hasn't walked home since. The room grew still. Eyes blinked back tears. A woman in the third row buried her face in her hands. Imani continued, "And then there's Miss Laverne, 62, retired nurse. She was pulled over last winter after a church service. She asked the officer why. He told her she had a taillight out. She didn't, but he made her get out of the car anyway, in the freezing cold, made her wait while he called backup for a broken light that didn't exist. She still can't drive at night without shaking." There were gasps, now murmurs of disgust and disbelief. Some heads bowed, others shook slowly in anger. And Marcus Imani said, her voice catching just slightly, "Just 13. His mom called 911 because he was having a panic attack." A panic attack. When the officers arrived, they shouted at him to calm down or else. One of them put him in cuffs. You tell me, how does a child calm down with cold metal wrapped around his wrists? Silence. Heavy, crushing, sacred. Imani paused, then straightened. Her voice rose steady and firm, each word sharpened with purpose. To Jordan, to Miss Laverne, to Marcus, to every name not yet spoken, every story not yet heard. I see you. I believe you. And I promise you this, I will not let your pain be buried in a file or forgotten in a policy review. We are building something better, and I will not stop until justice finds its way to your door. A beat of silence. Then the room erupted, not just in applause, but in something deeper, a release, a collective exhale. And in that moment, under those lights, with the truth still hanging in the air, Imani Carter was no longer just a speaker, a chief, or a symbol. She was a vessel for every voice that had ever been silenced, and a promise that silence would never win again. She leaned into the microphone slower now, her words weighted. Accountability doesn't weaken law enforcement, it strengthens it. It reminds us that our power comes from the trust of the people. Without that trust, the badge means nothing. From the side of the stage, Deputy Commissioner Evelyn Price watched with narrowed eyes, her arms folded. She had never praised Imani publicly, but she had not stood in her way either. Tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself a slight nod. Imani closed with one final sentence. Change does not begin in silence, it begins with one voice. And tonight, it becomes many. The crowd rose again, this time faster, louder, sustained. As she stepped down from the stage, a young boy, no older than 10, reached out from the aisle. "Thank you for standing up," he said. "You made me feel safe." Imani knelt slightly, looked him in the eyes, and replied, "Then everything I did was worth it." That night, the city of Hawthorne didn't fix itself. Injustice wasn't cured. Trust wasn't fully restored. But something undeniable had begun. Not a wave, but a current. Steady rising, relentless. One that wouldn't be stopped. And at its center, Imani Carter stood not alone anymore, but surrounded by a growing chorus ready to build something better. Not perfect, but honest. Not fast, but lasting. And in that there was hope. Real, hard-earned, powerful hope. 3 months after the night the video went viral, after the hearings, the press conferences, the policy reviews, the community rallies, and the slow, painful lifting of institutional blindfolds, the name Brent Wallace was finally removed from the active roster of the Hawthorne Police Department. Not buried, not quietly transferred, removed, with full documentation, public acknowledgement, and legal consequence. The silence that had once shielded him had been shattered, and the man who once sneered that he was the law was now subject to it. The announcement came on a bright Wednesday morning under a clear autumn sky. A press release was issued at exactly 9:00 a.m. sharp, signed by both Chief Harold Green and Deputy Commissioner Evelyn Price. It stated in plain, unambiguous language that Officer Brent Wallace had been found in gross violation of departmental ethics, procedural protocol, and civil rights obligations. As a result, his law enforcement certification had been officially revoked by the state, and he would no longer be eligible for rehire by any law enforcement agency in the region. Additionally, due to a thorough internal audit, 2 prior cases previously dismissed for lack of evidence were reopened under the oversight of an independent civilian board. And it didn't stop there. A class action civil lawsuit was filed shortly thereafter, led by attorney Cassandra Fields, who had once been publicly criticized for taking on unwinnable police misconduct cases. This time she had momentum, she had plaintiffs, she had evidence, and she had the weight of a city behind her. Jordan, the high school senior, Miss Laverne, the retired nurse, and 2 additional former complainants, all of them stepped forward, and Imani Carter stood behind them, not as a witness, not as a hero, but as a witness to them. Outside the courthouse steps, journalists swarmed like bees. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones thrust forward, but Imani didn't speak in sound bites. She didn't cater to headlines. She waited until the others had spoken, the victims, the mothers, the attorneys, and then stepped forward, only when the noise had dimmed enough to hear her voice. "We are not here today to ruin one man's life," she said, standing firm beneath the seal of justice etched into the courthouse stone. "We are here to honor the lives that have been ignored, dismissed, and violated by the abuse of power." Brent Wallace was not held accountable because of a badge. He was held accountable because he betrayed everything that badge stands for. This is not vengeance. This is responsibility. This is what justice actually looks like. From the back of the crowd, Maya Collins stood among a group of new recruits, all wearing plain clothes, notebooks in hand, observing. One of them, a young Asian-American woman named Tien Nguyen, turned to Maya and whispered, "I've never seen something like this before." Maya nodded. "That's because it almost never happens." But Chief Carter made it happen. The reaction inside the department was mixed, but the balance had shifted. There were still those who grumbled behind closed doors, muttering about cancel culture and overcorrection, but those voices were increasingly drowned out by a new wave of officers who didn't just respect Imani, they followed her. Not out of fear, but belief. Belief that she wasn't perfect, but she was just. And that was what the city needed. As for Brent Wallace, his face resurfaced briefly when local news aired his deposition footage. He looked older, smaller. The same man who once barked orders and wore his authority like armor now sat in a wrinkled gray suit, avoiding eye contact with the camera. He refused to answer most questions, citing legal advice. But the damage had already been done, not by slander, but by his own actions, finally unshielded from impunity. Weeks later, when the Civilian Oversight Board published its final report, Wallace's name was attached to a new departmental policy, the Carter Protocol, a mandatory transparency mandate requiring that any stop resulting in use of force or detainment without charge must be reviewed within 72 hours by a cross-rank oversight committee, including at least one civilian member. The policy was named not because Imani asked for it, but because the community demanded it. On the evening the report was published, Imani sat in her office alone, the sun bleeding amber through her blinds. On her desk sat a small wooden box inside it, a collection of handwritten letters. Most were anonymous, some signed only with initials. One read, "My daughter cried when she saw someone finally stand up to them. She said you made her believe she could become a cop too." Imani leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her body was tired, more than tired, exhausted, but her mind was clear. She had fought battles that left bruises no one could see. She had been gaslit, cornered, underestimated, and politicized. And yet, here she was, still standing, still carving a path where there had only been walls. There was a knock at her door. It creaked open. Maya stood there holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you hadn't eaten since breakfast," she said. Imani smiled faintly and motioned her in. They sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping slowly the city quiet behind them. Finally, Maya said, "You know, Brent Wallace was the first cop I ever saw when I toured this building. He looked at me like I didn't belong here. You made me believe I do." Imani turned to her, her voice soft but unwavering. "Then make sure the next girl who walks in here never doubts it for a second." Outside, the city of Hawthorne exhaled. The sirens still wailed, the lights still flickered, the challenges still remained. But justice had knocked, and this time someone had finally opened the door, not just to punish the guilty, but to rebuild the system from the inside out. Imani Carter didn't win because she yelled louder. She won because she listened deeper. And in doing so, she gave voice to a city that had been waiting too long to be heard. The story of Imani Carter is more than just a story about justice. It's a story about what happens when one person dares to stand up, not with anger, but with unwavering dignity. It reminds us that real power doesn't come from a badge or a title, but from the courage to do what's right, even when the system tells you to stay quiet. Imani showed us that silence is never neutral, and that real change begins the moment we decide to stop looking away. She proved that accountability isn't a threat, it's a promise. A promise to those who've been silenced, overlooked, and ignored for far too long. And what about you? If you were in Imani's shoes, would you stay silent, or would you speak up? Would you walk away, or would you stand your ground? If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about power and justice, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue telling stories that matter. Your support helps us shine a light where it's most needed. Thank you for standing with us.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.